You probably know that now many countries are building up their space military capacity. Today, the military space industry market is estimated at about $740 billion, and by 2025 it will cross the $1 trillion mark. In this video we're gonna tell you about the space race that began 30 years ago and continues to this day. Let's figure it out. The struggle for supremacy in space began about 60 years ago. The main rivals of the space race were the USA and the USSR. Space was one of the symbols of a superpower along with nuclear weapons, and competition for supremacy in orbit was a part of the Cold War. The race started with the launch of the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, by the Soviet Union in October 1957. From that moment on, military activity began in space. The successes of the USA and the USSR in space caused ambivalent feelings in the world. On the one hand, it was a sign of new prospects that opened up to humanity. On the other, because of the Cold War, the appearance of weapons of mass destruction in orbit was only a matter of time. And it happened. In the summer of 1962, the United States detonated a nuclear warhead at an altitude of 250 miles as part of the Starfish Prime project. The explosion formed a temporary radiation belt around the Earth, disabling several satellites, including the British Ariel 1. World leaders began to realize what kind of catastrophe nuclear weapons in orbit would lead to. In 1967, the United States, Great Britain and the USSR signed a large-scale space treaty. The document forbade sending nuclear, chemical and biological weapons to space, building any military structures and mechanisms in orbit. The treaty also declared space the property of all mankind, open for exploration. Thanks to such initiatives, space has never become a large-scale theater of military operations. On the contrary, it's an important field for nuclear deterrence. By 2021, there are about 6,000 satellites in space, of which more than 2,600 are active. They provide communications, monitor the Earth, monitor the environment and border security, and are responsible for the navigation system. At the same time, at least 300 satellites exist for purely military purposes. The rest of the space objects are actually space garbage. More than 50% of operating satellites, both commercial and government, are controlled by NATO member countries. In particular, satellites allow to ensure the accuracy and striking power of strike forces and means. And the first space confrontation took place 30 years ago, in 1991. It demonstrated the real importance of extraterrestrial space for the military. That's when the US started the Persian Gulf campaign. Although there were no direct clashes in space, the Global Positioning System, GPS, helped the Americans to conduct a successful operation. It was first used during the Vietnam War. Without orbital eyes, it would be much harder for US troops to navigate, communicate, and manage troops in the deserts of Kuwait and Iraq. Massive artillery bombardments, the so-called steel rain, would also be impossible without GPS. The main contenders for leadership in space remain the United States, China and Russia. Take for example such an obvious indicator as the number of satellites. These countries have 1,327, 363, and 169 of them, respectively. But it's not just about satellites, so let's look at the leading countries in more detail. In 2020, the budget of the Space Forces was only $40 million. And in 2021, they will be financed for more than $15 billion. A sharp increase in funding is one of the key signals that symbolizes the beginning of space wars. The vast majority of the Space Force budget, $10 billion, will go to research, development, and implementation of new technologies. The remaining money will be divided into operation and maintenance, as well as the supply of new devices. For example, $1.8 billion will be spent on the purchase of 2 GPS-3 systems from Lockheed Martin with improved protection against interference. These units are 3 times more accurate than existing GPS systems. The United States also has the vast majority of active satellites, 1,327. China launched their first satellite in 1970 and initially didn't pose a threat to the United States and the USSR, which at that time were already actively exploring space. However, along with the growth of the economy, Beijing's ambitions also increased. In 2003, China de facto declared itself a space power by launching manned flights into space. And in 2007, Beijing showed that it was capable not only of peaceful, but also of fully armed competition in space. They used a rocket to destroy their old meteorological satellite, which was hanging at an altitude of more than 530 miles. Before that, Beijing had made 3 similar attempts, but all of them were unsuccessful. This 1-ton satellite exploded, forming at least 100,000 dangerous fragments of space debris. We're gonna show the holes made by them a little later. China's actions have been condemned by almost all Western countries, including the United States. The criticism was mainly due to the emergence of another threat to American equipment in space, as well as the emergence of space debris. But despite the protests, China continued to test anti-satellite weapons. And now, perhaps, they are able to do it better than anyone else. Today, China has various launch vehicles, satellites of all kinds, launches automatic interplanetary stations, and has programs for the exploration of the Moon and Mars. During the implementation of the first program, Beijing managed to achieve an impressive result, to land a spacecraft on the far side of the Moon. They were the first in the world to do it. Beijing has also announced plans to build a habitable base on the Moon by 2029. This episode of China's activity in space forced the administration of the American president to actively develop the military and civilian space capabilities of the United States. We are now participating in the space race, as it was in the 1960s. China has become the first country to land a research vehicle on the far side of the Moon, which indicates the country's desire to take a strategic leading position in lunar exploration, said former U.S. Vice President Michael Pence. The Strategic Support Forces of the People's Liberation Army are responsible for Beijing's military activity in space. They were created in 2015 as a result of a major military reform. They combined almost all aspects of military space operations, becoming a single command center for space launches, army support on Earth, as well as providing satellite communications and intelligence. Talks about the need to create a space force in China began in the 1990s. Beijing has seen Washington's operational capabilities gained through space and GPS. So, in 2000, the Chinese military, among other things, created their own Beidou navigation system. Russia is still a space state for now, although India may soon squeeze it out of the top 3. We'll tell you about it later. Moscow participates in missions on the International Space Station. It launches rockets from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Until 2020, the US used the services of Soviet-Russian carriers, but due to SpaceX's technological breakthrough, the Americans planned to completely abandon Russian services. In 2021, the whole cosmicity of Russia lies in the legacy of the Soviet Union. Flights to the ISS are carried out via the Soviet Soyuz and Progress carriers. Let's take a look at the Russian space program for 2016 to 2025. The announced culmination is the approach to the Moon for full-scale research, as well as the landing of people in 2030. China plans it for 2029, the USA plans to do it by 2024, or 2028 at the latest. But 5 years have already passed since the approval and start of the program, and the Russian space agency, Roscosmos, has not yet fulfilled a single point from the plan. This means that the deadlines are already being shifted by at least 5 years. Russia is trying to improve the situation by creating new projects, but they become obsolete even at the planning stage. The Angara A5 rocket project and the new Soyuz 5 and Soyuz 6 rocket projects were outdated even before the start of serious development, because they are based on the Soviet Zenit medium-class rocket. It was created in the last century. There are seemingly breakthrough projects, but their prospects and feasibility are covered with a veil of secrecy and fog, so it is quite difficult to evaluate them objectively. For example, there is the program Zeus. Previously, this project had many different names during different periods: Nuclear Tug, Transport and Energy Module, Nucleon. Its layout was presented by the Russian design bureau Arsenal at the International Aviation and Space Salon 2021. The concept of this program is a nuclear reactor in space, which is capable of generating half a megawatt, that is, 500 kilowatts. The current ISS, for comparison, has a little more than 70 kilowatts available. According to the ambitious mission plan, one payload unit will detach near the Moon, then another near Venus, and then the device will go to the Jupiter system to explore the icy shells of satellites for the presence of life. This whole structure weighs more than 30 tons. And it will do it in a matter of 50 months. At the same time, the device is dual use. And there is already news that it will be used not only on distant frontiers, but also on the near-Earth orbit. Roscosmos solemnly promises that it will start implementing the mission in a matter of just 10 years. After all, the advance project of a tug for some ridiculous 4.2 billion rubles is expected in 3 years. In addition to the United States, China, and Russia, several dozen other states are taking part in the space race. For example, the UK is slightly behind Russia in terms of the number of satellites. It has more than 130 devices. The top 5 includes Japan, which has about 80 active satellites. These states also have their own space programs. Meanwhile, India is right behind Russia in this race. In 2019, it declared itself a space state. That was the year when the Indian military managed to shoot down a space satellite in low Earth orbit. New Delhi is actively preparing to conduct independent manned programs on its own spacecraft. They conducted unmanned test flights in 2021, and in 2022-2023, they plan a launch with a person on board. The country has long-running lunar and Mars programs. And although in 2019, the Indian module crashed when landing on the Moon, it at least reached it. One of NASA's current priorities is the Commercial Crew Program. Its goal is to stop using Russian Soyuzes for flights to the ISS. The main contractors are SpaceX and Boeing. The success of the program was in November 2020. Elon Musk's company delivered 4 astronauts to the ISS on a private manned Crew Dragon ship from American soil. The private sector is also attracted to military space programs. Many private corporations work for the Pentagon. De facto, this means that the companies involved in the industry have long been participants in the militarization of space and the future space war. The leaders in the defense aerospace industry market are Boeing, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Lockheed, General Dynamics, Airbus, Northrop Grumman, and United Technologies. Listed companies get most of the revenue from military and civil aviation projects. However, they are all involved in the development, production, and maintenance of space vehicles, both civil and military. If we take into account income exclusively from space projects, then the market leader is SpaceX. And in the first half of 2021, for the first time in history, a private company surpassed any country or space agency in orbital launches. In 6 months of 2021, SpaceX has carried out 20 successful launches. The State Space Corporation of China is in second place, and Roscosmos is in third place. Moreover, Elon Musk's company turned out to be the leader in launching people into orbit, having already delivered 4 astronauts to the ISS. Here the second place was divided between Russia and China. Technically, everyone had 1 launch, but the crew of the Crew 2 mission consisted of 4 people, while Russia and China delivered 3 astronauts each. And moreover, in terms of the number of launched satellites, SpaceX has no equals at all. They launched 930 probes, and 700 of which are satellites of the Starlink system. But another figure is much more important. In the first half of 2021, SpaceX launched more than 230 metric tons of cargo into orbit, while the rest of the world combined launched about 175 tons into orbit. And this is only for the first half of 2021. Of course, space exploration doesn't end at Musk alone. Other billionaires are also beginning to actively explore space flights, albeit on a much smaller scale than Elon. Billionaire Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin and billionaire Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic pursue the same goal: to send tourists on space excursions and do scientific experiments in suborbital space without the participation of state corporations. The ships will cross the boundary of the atmosphere in space, but won't enter near Earth orbit. The founder of Virgin Galactic, billionaire Richard Branson, became the pioneer in this. He flew into space with several more passengers on July 11, 2021. His VSS Unity rocket plane rose about 55 miles above sea level. The ship stayed at this altitude for a few minutes. The tourists were able to experience weightlessness. And then the device went down and successfully landed on the runway of the Spaceport America in New Mexico. The Blue Origin ship, unlike its competitor, is capable of getting to more than 60 miles. As VSS Unity, the spacecraft can fit 6 people. They can observe what's going on outside through the portholes. However, the 2 flights have fundamental differences. Virgin Galactic uses a carrier ship that detaches a rocket plane with tourists at a certain height. It is powered by its own engines and rises to a suborbital orbit. Blue Origin has a completely different approach. Bezos's company has developed a launch vehicle with a sealed passenger capsule. The capsule separates from the rocket at an altitude of about 25 miles. After that, the launch vehicle lands on the ground on its own, and the capsule gains altitude by inertia and goes into space for a few minutes. The capsule returns to Earth with the help of parachutes, starting the braking engines before landing. An important difference between the New Shepard ship and the Virgin Galactic rocket plane is that the entire flight takes place in fully automatic mode, whereas VSS Unity is controlled by pilots. Thus, the Bezos mission became the first unmanned flight into space with a crew consisting entirely of civilians. Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin have received official permits for manned launches. According to Richard Branson's reports, at least 600 people have already bought tickets for flights of his rocket plane. Among them was also Elon Musk. Each ticket costs $250,000. Blue Origin customers have to pay more. Elon Musk also plans to enter the sphere of space tourism. In early 2022, his Crew Dragon ship will send travelers to the ISS. Before that, 7 people visited it as tourists. All of them were delivered by Russian Soyuz ships. The process of militarization of space has not stopped since the first years of exploration, and the main object of competition in the space confrontation is resources. In April 2020, the US president signed a decree authorizing American companies to develop and extract resources on the Moon and other celestial bodies. Russia and China immediately accused the United States of violating the Outer Space Treaty. Moscow called it an aggressive plan to seize the territories of other planets. Beijing and Moscow have reminded the world about their proposal to adopt a treaty on the prevention of the deployment of weapons in outer space. The document would not only prohibit the deployment of any weapons in space, but even threaten to use force against space objects of other countries. Each of the 3 states has anti-satellite missiles based on the ground. However, countries are also developing a new type of space arsenal. For example, American intelligence claims that China and Russia have laser weapons technology that incapacitates satellites. Russia and China are also actively using and testing scavenger satellites. Their civilian use is the capture of garbage, and their military use is the capture of a satellite. According to Washington, China has already demonstrated the ability to maneuver such devices in space, approaching other satellites. Russia is also testing a similar technology. In 2020, Russia launched the Cosmos 2543 satellite into orbit. An object separated from it and flew towards another Russian satellite. Moscow says it's a small spacecraft, and the US says it was a projectile. Before that, Russia also learned how to maneuver satellites in space. In 2017, they sent their device close to an American satellite. A similar incident occurred again. Russia launched a satellite that began actively maneuvering around the US government device. And, quite likely, it possessed the characteristics of a weapon. And in general, the phrase space war is usually associated with the Star Wars movies and other blockbusters. However, in the 1970s, the USSR launched a secret military space station Almaz into space. Its uniqueness lay in the equipment. They installed a 23mm rapid-firing Richter cannon on it. In the end, this project was abandoned due to the high cost, but this case clearly demonstrates how wars in space were imagined in the past. Nowadays, there are no plans to put machine guns on spacecraft anymore. The main emphasis is on 2 directions: strengthening satellites and anti-satellite weapons. After all, any satellite can be considered a weapon and be a target during a war. But there is an issue. The use of anti-satellite rockets creates space debris, which can later lead to the Kessler effect. Debris collides with other debris and creates a domino effect that makes low Earth orbit unsuitable for flights. It would seem that a small man-made junk can't cause much damage. It's just lost bolts or pieces of plastic. But here's an example of the damage. The photo shows the result of accidental contact between the 4-inch aluminum skin of the ISS and a piece of plastic at a speed of 4 miles per second. Or if you convert it into a car format, it's just 15,600 miles per hour. And here is a fragment of a 1.5-inch skin, scratched tangentially with an M8 bolt, flying in space at a speed of 3.7 miles per second. And if the bolt was moving at a speed of 6.2 miles per second, its direct contact with the ISS or satellite would be equivalent to an explosion of an anti-tank projectile. The scale of the problems that space junk flying at hypersonic speed can cause is shown in the movie Gravity. And judging by the photos of the ISS holes, this is not such a big exaggeration. How do you feel about this race of military space technologies? Let's discuss it in the comments. Thank you for watching this video and see you in future videos on our channel.